Hey, what's up guys, Kadachi here and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a Diablo build video for you guys and the first of many. I've been playing Diablo 4 for quite some time and I've been heavily enjoying the amount of build crafting there is, especially this season. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys my Rend Bleed Barb build with X-Falls and Flicker Step. This build is able to take on Uber Lilith. There are some things you have to be careful with. Since this is a bleed build, there are times where you can melt her first phase and she will still do a mechanic that can one hit you, so just make sure to dodge that. On the second phase, it sometimes spawns the Blood Skull orbs. In this fight it did not, but if they do spawn, just dodge them and you'll be just fine. It is also very nice in T100 Nightmare dungeons. I have been preparing for the new Avatar of Zir content, and I think this build will be very fun in the end game once you have acquired everything needed. Alright, so let's get into the gear. I know right now my stats are all over the place. I just put on full legendaries, which is not what I usually wear, but I wanted to show you guys it's actually easily doable without all the uniques. Alright, so for the helmet we went with Relentless Berserker's aspect, just for some more berserking duration, for some more damage. And then we went with max total armor, 2 resistances, and cooldown reduction for our cooldowns. So much needed. You can easily opt in for a Shaco, of course, but you do not need a Shaco because you can easily just get total armor on your helmet and run an aspect of might. For the chest piece, we went with Disobedience. If you're at 14k armor cap, you don't really need Disobedience. I don't know how hard Avatar of Zir will be. Will you need Disobedience or not? We will have to find out, but for now we went with that and max roll total armor again, some damage reduction from close enemies, and 2 resistances. This is our gloves. We went with Intercom just for the boss damage. This is strictly just for boss DPS. 4 ranks to rend, that's going to be our main source of DPS. Lucky hit for our X-Haul proc, crit chance for more crits, and attack speed for more damage. So for our pants, we're going to be going with the aspect of might. I still have a codex roll on these. It could definitely be a full roll. Damage reduction while injured. It does not have to be damage reduction while injured. It can be completely just damage reduction or damage reduction from close. I went with 2 resistances again. Now this is because I had 2 resistances on my helmet and I put on a Shaco. You do not need 2 resistances on your pants or on your helmet. You can actually change the 2 resistances off the helmet and put something else that would help the build a little bit more. And we went with max total armor once again because total armor is very important. For our boots, we are going to be running Flicker Steps because Flicker Steps is going to be major in this build for getting your ult back basically right away. I heavily enjoy the all stats and the movement speed. You don't really need the ultimate skill damage, but the damage reduction from close is also a nice touch as well. For our amulets, we are going to be running the aspect of elements. I really like this aspect. It was very slept on in the beginning and I did not run it in the beginning. I ran it in a little bit closer to the middle. So for our amulet, we are going to be running the aspect of elements. I really feel like this was a slept on aspect. I just recently started using it not too long ago. I did some testing and it does scale bleed damage immensely. I also run Doombringer with this build, so it does work with that as well. And just that combination is just amazing. 45% times damage, it's great. We're gonna get some total armor. You want total armor on the amulet. You want damage reduction as well. And I went with ranks to cut to the bone. I didn't really do any testing with passives. This is actually the first time I got a passive on my amulet and it was pretty good. But if there's another passive that you would like to go for, you could probably do that. And physical damage over time, you don't really need that. I just got that and I was stuck with it. But you can go for something else with that, like movement speed or maybe another damage reduction. but either one, yeah, that'll be good. For the ring, you already know we're using X-Falls. This ring is amazing. I like it. It's really good for any DOT build so far. Poison Rogue, Fire Sorcerer, Bleed Barbarian. It's all just really good. Now for our actual ring, we're gonna want crit strike chance, crit strike damage, vulnerable damage, and lucky hit chance. Now I'll tell you why we're gonna be running vulnerable damage in a second. So for our ring, we are running the aspect of Berserk Ripping for the additional bleed damage. Later on, when I show you guys the other options, you will not need to run this aspect, to be honest. I just like it for the extra bleed. But we're gonna have lucky hit chance for our X-Fall proc, some vulnerable damage. I will tell you why we are running vulnerable damage in a second. Crit strike damage for more higher crits on the X-Fall, and crit strike chance for more crits. Our sword, we're gonna be running the aspect of the expectant. You want damage while berserking. I was trying to roll crit strike damage on the sword, but I couldn't get it. But this worked perfectly fine. Just for the Lilith kill and the T100, it was perfectly fine. But you can roll crit strike damage on the sword, and vulnerable damage and strength stat. For the next sword, for our one-hander, you want crit strike damage, vulnerable damage, and damage while berserking. We're going to be running the accelerating aspect on this one with strength stat, of course. Another strength stat, crit strike damage, vulnerable damage, damage while berserking. We want edge masters on here. And for our last two-handed, we're going to be running limitless rage aspect, strength stat, another crit strike, vulnerable damage, and damage while berserking. Now for boss killing, you're really going to be running the Fields of Crimson. This sword is really good. I usually switch out Iron Skin for Rupture when I want to kill the boss, like Lilith or Duriel per se, but this sword is just really good on its own. And yeah, now to show you guys the end game portion of this build, if you do own these uniques, this will only make this build 100 times better and hit 100 times harder. I do run Doombringer, Grandfather, Tybalt, and Shaco with this build. Tybalt, you never want to run in tier 100s. You can. My armor is at 12k with it. But I don't usually like to run Tybalt in a tier 100 or higher because not only does it take away from my resistances, it takes away from my armor that I could potentially have. But for boss killing, yes, it is amazing and I do use it. For our expertise, we will be running the two-handed axe for the increased damage to vulnerable enemies and the increased critical strike chance against vulnerable enemies. That crit strike chance alone is actually helping us build a lot. You would think we would be running the two-handed sword expertise for the more bleed damage, but the crit strike chance and the increased damage, you just can't pass that up. So starting with our skills, we are going to be running the Flay basic attack for the starter bleed damage. This skill also has amazing lucky hit chance. It's going to most likely be proccing your X-Falls a lot more than you think. For our next skill, we're going to be going with the Rend for our core skill. This is where our damage is going to be coming from. You can boost this up to 3 as well, and you're going to be either getting Violent Rend or Furious Rend. It's completely up to you. It won't heavily affect your damage that much, and this gives you more Fury, so that means more damage at the end. But I just like the increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Next, we're going to be running the Endless Fury to be getting more Fury off of our two-handed sword weapons. That's what we're going to be using. Next, we want some defenses, so we went with the Imposing Presence for additional max life. And then right after that, we're getting Martial Vigor for damage reduction against elites. That is going to be very useful. So this is the defense portion of this build. This has nothing to do with boss killing. This is for Nightmare Dungeon clearing completely. We're going to be running Iron Skin, and we're going to get it all the way up to 3 so we can get the healing from our Iron Skin when it's active. Next, we're going to be getting Challenging Shout because that 42 damage reduction is so noticeable, so helpful, so useful. We also get Fury Generation each time we are hit. Next, we're going to be running the War Cry. This is our major damage right here. This is one of the major things you're going to be getting our damage from. Super great, super important. If you can go for power war cry, I usually go for mighty war cry because fortify. If I get fortify, I get more damage off of one of our passives. I'll show you that in a second. You can get booming voice to increase your shout durations. Really useful. Next, we're going to be getting aggressive resistance, damage reduction while berserking. This could honestly be upgraded more if you wanted more DR, but that's completely up to you. Prolific Fury, very important one right here. While berserking, your Fury generation is increased. That is a great one to have. Next, we're going to be going over here to Pit Fighter. More damage. You deal 9% increased damage to close enemies. That is amazing, and you gain 6% distance damage reduction for free. What can you say? Next, we're going to be getting the Slaying Strike. You deal 23% increased damage against injured enemies when you max that out. It's really good for one-shotting enemies. I like it. So we're going to be buying one of the hamstring. We don't really slow enemies. So we're going to be putting one on the hamstring. We don't really care too much about slowing. That's fine. Our build isn't too much into that. But cut to the bone. Your bleeding effects deal 30% times increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Because I have it in my amulet, it is also added up. So that is very useful to have. Once again, you don't need to have that on your amulet, but I feel like it does help. I haven't done much testing, but it's great. Next, we're gonna go to Thick Skin. You take damage, you get Fortify for it. It's not too crazy, we're only getting one for that. But we want this one while you have Fortify, more of your maximum life. You deal 12% increased damage. That's more damage right there. For free, because you're always fortifying. Next, we're going to be getting the heavy-handed passive all the way at the bottom. Get increased critical strike damage for having a two-handed weapon. That's great. We don't really want this one. Our build doesn't really overpower. So lastly, we're going to be having our ultimate skill. This is the bread and butter. This is what's going to be pushing out major damage. And if you're using your flicker stuff, you will be having this up all the time. Lastly, we're going to be using the Gushing Wounds key passive. When causing an enemy to bleed, you have a chance to equal to your... Lastly, we're going to be using the Gushing Wounds key passive. When causing an enemy to bleed, you have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to increase the bleed amount by 115% times of your critical strike damage bonus. That is so very useful when it comes to proccing X-Fall damage, hitting 10 mil X-Fall crits. It just helps you 115%. Come on. Overpowering a bleeding enemy creates an explosion that inflicts bleeding damage, blah blah blah. We don't really overpower in this build. It'll happen here and there, but we're mostly going to be critical. Do a separate leveling build. I kind of use the same exact skills and just leveled up my Paragon all the way. Either you will see on Maxwell a new Paragon board just for leveling, or you will see the same Paragon board here, and that'll just be it. But either way, this worked out just fine. I didn't really see fit that it needed to be changed for leveling. But anyways, let's get into it. So for starters, we're gonna have damage while berserking. This is gonna be so key major for the legendary node in the Paragon. Let's go up here. Yes, legendary node. You will literally get damage for just having damage while berserking stat on your gear, on your Paragon, anywhere. It's free damage. Secondly, we're going to have some vulnerable damage. You want exploit glyph. I don't really have too much. I'm going to show you guys why we have so much vulnerable damage in our tree in a second. Next, we're going to be using the damage to bleeding enemies. This I feel is so very major for my boss killing. I did a lot of testing. This is where I got the most damage from. You also get a 5% increased critical strike chance against bleeding enemies. So, and you're always bleeding enemies. So, next we went with critical strike damage. This really pushes our X-Falls crits up there. This gets it high. If you can put it somewhere better than this glyph here, this board here, you can get a lot more out of it. I know you can probably get it to 130%. but I felt like 115% was just fine. Let's go down here. This is why we have so much vulnerable damage in our build. We get more bleeding damage just for having vulnerable damage stat. I feel like you didn't really need bleeding damage to make this build work, but the bleeding damage just made it 100 times better. Bleeding damage alone didn't really proc the X falls. It's really the amount of lucky hit chance and crit you have, and you're really worrying about the initial X falls crit rather than the amount of bleeding you do. But this helps in the long run for sure. So we go over here and we have might slotted. I just wanted the increased 8 times multiplicative damage for having a 2-handed sword, and we get to buff our other nodes around us. Very useful, very good. That'll be it for that. I'll literally have the Paragon and skill tree on maximum so you guys can see it in full and see why I chose this and why I chose that for the build. So for the build, all you guys really need to do is proc the damage cry, pop your ult, apply vampire curse, and you're just doing damage. That's it right there. Get your lucky hit attack speed, and there goes the HP bar. Obviously, it's not really good showing on a test dummy, but I can assure you this build is cracked. If this video did help you, if you guys did enjoy the build, if you guys do enjoy the build, please leave a like and subscribe. I got a lot more builds in the think tank, so there's more to come. That being said, I will see you guys in the next one.